basement in my home growing up was a treasure trove of wonders. It seemed that was where everything ended up that didn't have a place somewhere else. And so on one corner of the room there was the stash of my grandmother's jarred peaches. One area contained every bit of camping gear imaginable, from backpacks to sleeping bags to tents to pots and pans and stoves. A little bit further on down in my basement you could find cheese making kits next to yogurt making kits. However, most of my basement growing up was storage for arts and crafts supplies. My mother had been a Girl Scout leader for most of her adult life and had spent many years acquiring wonders. And so there was leather crafting tools and stamps in one section. There was an enameler in another. There was also a wide variety of felt and feathers and paper. My brother and sister and I had a lot of fun exploring, or as my parents called it, making a mess. And one time, we explored the shelves that were in the back. And on the left shelf, there was a collection of pet rocks, just sitting there for who knows how long. One of the after effects of the fad from pet rocks in the 70s was that everybody started making them. So there on the shelves were a few examples, along with some rocks, some paint, some googly eyes, and glue. And there they sat. I don't know how long they were there.
I'm doing this one.
But they sat there. And they did nothing. I think that was the whole point of the fad. That was the joke behind them, is that a pet rock wouldn't get up and scratch your furniture. A pet rock would not leave you a present in the morning on the carpet. A pet rock did not need to be fed. A pet rock would not make any sound. They were just rocks. Expecting anything else from them would just be silly, wouldn't it? This is one of the reasons why I've always wondered why Jesus says that if his disciples were silent on that Palm Sunday, the rocks would cry out. We all know that rocks don't make noise. But maybe in all of this, Jesus is trying to tell us something else, as he usually is. I mean, if we think about Palm Sunday in general, to me it's always struck me as an odd day. We join our voices with the original disciples who boldly shouted hosannas as Jesus came triumphantly into Jerusalem. They proclaimed Jesus as king. They took their coats off and threw them on the ground for Jesus to walk over. But then, over the course of the next week, those voices would fall silent. Voices would turn to treachery as Judas would betray Jesus and turn him over to the authorities. Voices would turn to denial as Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Voices would even turn to bloodthirst as the crowds would shout out, "Crucify him." The joy and celebration that was Palm Sunday has always seemed like a fleeting celebration. to me. On that Sunday, all those years ago, those people shouted with joy. And then they disappeared. And they weren't there. So why would it make sense that the very earth, that the very creation of God would cry out if Jesus' disciples were quiet on that day? Would they cry out so that the creation's voice would be lost too? Would the celebration still fade if the earth had shouted out, Hosannas? I mean, this is a celebration that would lead to the cross, a celebration that would lead to resurrection and salvation. But it's a different kind of celebration. Jesus didn't say that if his disciples were quiet, that the flowers would shout out, or that the animals would proclaim his glory. It was rocks. And I think we know that rocks don't have a voice. Rocks are there to be walked over. They're there to be built with. They're taken out of the ground so that crops can grow. They are either things to use or things to remove. They're just things. And maybe, just maybe, Jesus is saying that if his disciples didn't shout out their hosannas, then the Pharisees would hear it from things. Or maybe they would hear it from people that they considered as things. People that were lesser. Right after Jesus triumphantly enters Jerusalem in Luke, the first thing he does is he weeps over Jerusalem. And then he goes and cleanses the temple. Jesus weeps over Jerusalem because the people don't recognize the true peace that he is bringing. They are not recognizing what it actually means for Jesus to be their king. And then Jesus goes from there and cleanses the temple from the moneymakers, from the people who were there taking advantage of others. So maybe Jesus is talking about something else. The kind of king that Jesus was and is didn't change because the voices were silenced. Maybe Jesus was saying that those who normally don't have a voice would have spoken out. Those that he came there for, that he came here for, would have raised their voices. So maybe that means for us that it is our work to make sure that our voices don't go silent. It means that we need to stop getting caught up in the ways of the world. But it also reminds us to remember the other voices. The voices that come from those who we might think of as being on the fringes of society. The voices of addicts and drug dealers. The voices of migrants and immigrants. The voices of people that that we find it far easier to walk by than to listen to. Not just to talk with, but to listen to. Every one of us is part of God's creation. Everything that surrounds us is part of God's creation. Maybe it's time for us to listen. To listen better to those other voices. To listen to hear where those hosannas are coming from in places that we tend to walk away from. Maybe this is a call for us to go into those dark places, into those uncomfortable places that we would much better prefer to write a check and let somebody else do it. Jesus is king of them, just like Jesus is king of us. Maybe we need to listen. Maybe we need to stop thinking about others as less than people. It's really easy to do that. It's really easy to get caught up in that trap because we are constantly bombarded with stories and news of things that I, for one, would much rather shut my eyes and pretend didn't happen. But maybe this Holy Week, this time when the voices went silent, is not simply just a time for us to go silent, but a time for us to listen. To listen to the voices that we don't normally hear. To listen to the words that come from darkness, that come out of it. And then to remember those words. To remember those other voices as we prepare ourselves for Easter. As we prepare for resurrection, as we prepare ourselves for renewal. Maybe, just maybe, maybe it's time for us to listen to the darkness. Listen to the sadness. Listen to those voices that make us uncomfortable. Listen to those who disagree with us. Listen to those whom we can't stand. Listen to those who make our skin crawl. Or maybe it's time for us to listen to others. To hear where they are. Because they aren't just a stupid rock.